welcome to the UK column. Today, I'm joined by Catherine Austin-Fitts, president of Solari, which publishes the Solari Report, a former investment banker, and who served as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner during the first Bush administration. Welcome to the program, Catherine.
Thank you, Mike. I'm a great admirer of UK column, and I really appreciate everything you and your colleagues do there.
Thank you very much. I'm going to begin this by asking you for your views on the new Trump government, because a lot of people have been expressing a lot of hope and a lot of hope invested in Trump. And I just wonder, do you think that's justified?
I have a lot of hope, but not based on anything the Trump administration is doing. Other than, I don't know, my father was a doctor, and he used to always talk about how healthy it is when an infection rises and all the pus comes to the surface. That you have a way of dealing with it. So in that sense, I think there may be some hope. But no, I don't place a lot of hope in. I see the Trump administration moving very quickly to build the control grid and to plunder the United States. So I don't have a lot of hope.
And is this because of him himself or the people that he has around him?
So I think it's a combination of things. First of all, the United States has failed. If you look at the Neocon strategy to build a unipolar model, it's failed. And now any administration has to go through a gut-wrenching change. The plan was to maintain hegemony against the Chinese. In the last 10 years, we've given up an enormous technological leadership in both science and technology. And we failed to implode Russia, which was part of where we're going to get the resources to maintain that hegemony. So the neocon strategy has failed, and that means that we're in for a gut-wrenching change. But also new technology has changed. And if you look at the tools we were using to maintain the unipolar model, we need new tools. So what you're seeing is a getting rid of the old, flushing out the old tools and bringing in the new tools. So it's a big change that has to be engineered. And if you look at who's changing it, to me, if anything, the Trump administration is, I call it the Musk operation. So to me, Musk is not a person, it's a theater, it's an operation. I don't know how many actors you have playing Elon Musk, but it's a lot. and if you look at the Musk operation, essentially that is a version, a portion of the deep state that it's reporting to. I mean, you're watching the deep state go from a unipolar model to a multipolar model, and in that conversion, build the control grid.
I have heard you use the word coup recently with respect to the Trump regime.
Right.
Is that something you really believe, stand by?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But we've had a financial coup that's been going on since 1998. And the going direct reset, I mean, I can take you through the history and the chronology, but this is simply the next phase. So, yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things you need to build the control grid they want to build is you need to change fiscal policy from being run by Congress to being run by the bankers. And what you do to do that, what you do is you fire the civil service and replace them with corporate contractors who then basically can ignore Congress. So the question is, who's going to run fiscal policy? Is it going to be Congress? And to do that, you need a civil service which implements and requires instructions who are compatible with what Congress has authorized or appropriated. Instead, if you put in corporate contractors, they will proceed to do, and historically have proceeded to do, essentially, where the central bankers have been able to drive fiscal operations in the government, it's because corporate contractors were there and were willing to act on non-written instructions, compatible with Congress. So to me, that switching of control of fiscal policy into the hands of the banks is part of a coup.
This is something I wanted to just delve a little bit deeper with you, because in a presentation you gave recently, you were talking about the civil service in the United States and talking about the corporate takeover of the operations,
Yeah.
right? And now in the United Kingdom, part of the problem that we have is that our civil service is a permanent civil service. That when a new government comes in, that doesn't mean a change of personnel, for example. And so, we tend to find that policy runs from one regime to the next without really skipping a beat, no matter whether it's blue or red is the color of the team that happens to be in government at the time. Is that the same situation in the US? And if that is the same situation, and you're talking about the corporate takeover of that as being something worse, but how much worse could it be actually?
It could be much worse. Um, so if the civil service generally tends to do what they have written instructions to do. So let's say you're a new politician coming in, a new administration, and you want the civil service, which is going to the right, to go to the left. What you have to do is you have to read the written instructions, both for the program and then, the specific written instructions they've been given. And you have to change the program and change the written instructions. And that takes a lot of work, but it can be done. Um, Now, if you have a corporate contractor who's doing, what you've ordered to do, is it easier to fire them and put in a new corporate contractor? Maybe. Either way, you have to give them instructions. The difference is when I was assistant secretary of housing, I would have corporate contractors who were quite willing to do things that were outside the law. So if you wanted things done for the black budget and you wanted things done for this deep state, by and large, you would have the corporate contractors do it. And what you would sometimes have to do is get the civil service to be afraid of doing things, and then they would go along, or they would simply do nothing. But but if you're going to operationalize, if you're going to run the federal government either for the benefit of private corporations or pay private corporations to run the operations, so you can privatize them. So if you look at a lot of the data or things that are being shut down or data that's being potentially privatized, those are functions that can literally be turned over. So for example, if you shut down all the bureaucracies that are collecting data on weather, doing weather, and you shut them down and the government doesn't do it anymore, then private companies can pick it up and charge people fees for weather services, et cetera. So that's a kind of privatization, including on the just do it method. But what you can also do is you can also fire the civil service and then hire corporate contractors who do that function, but they do that function in ways that have side reports, so to speak. So they're willing. Traditionally, my personal experience is they're willing to do things that don't follow the law.
Okay, well, we'll come back onto this a little bit later, but I wanted to move on to two of the people that have received quite a lot of attention during the confirmation hearings, and of course that's RFK Jr. and
Mhm.
Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on them and whether they can actually achieve anything under this regime that we see in place now.
I didn't watch the Gabbard hearings. I had said that I wasn't going to watch the RFK hearings, and then I just started to watch them, and I couldn't stop. It was just. Did you watch any of the RFK hearings?
I've seen a few clips, but they were out of context, so I haven't seen the whole thing by any means.
Okay, I probably saw about 50%. What was shocking to me, Mike, was watching U.S. senators who refused to face the fact that we have an epidemic of disease among children, which is literally at an extinction level event, refuse to take responsibility for it, refuse to face it, and refuse to have a plan. If you have a problem with the candidate for HHS and you don't like his plan, then the way to refute his plan is to have a better plan. They weren't doing that. They were just trying to throw mud at him and grill him upside down one side and down another. And it was literally embarrassing because they didn't. It looked like the Senate of the United States was not under adult supervision, with rare exception. There were a couple senators who were. Ron Johnson is always notably terrific, but it was really embarrassing and it was frightening because you're looking at a society that has gone so far away from any pathway towards success as a civilization that to me it was very scary. Now I've had many experiences with how bad it is, but level of denial and the level of indifference to what is has become literally a mass atrocity. I mean, we're watching millions of Americans poisoned and disabled, including the children, and here's the richly paid Senate doing nothing. It was pretty shocking.
Do you think RFK is going to have the ability to do anything about that? Is he going to be able to get these guys into action?
What he has said his strategy is, and I believe him, is he is going to do everything he can to get the actual data and get it published. So he's talked about radical transparency. If he can do that, it will make a huge contribution. And now that is a very slow, painstaking job. That's 2 to 4 years in the bowels of the bureaucracy, digging through, trying to get stuff, trying to get it published, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a long, hard job. Can he do it? I think there's a reasonably good chance he can do it. If you look at what's happened in the last week or two, he's being put through an incredible process to me that's designed to get rid of him.
Right.
So his first 2 weeks have been brutal. If you look at what they're doing with measles, with MMR and anti-Semitism, I don't know the details of who's doing what and how they're trying. It looks to me like somebody's trying very hard to squeeze him out.
Okay, we'll watch the space then. Any chance for peace in Ukraine? Do you believe that Trump is actually going to do a deal with Russia?
Here's the thing to remember about Ukraine. Ukraine has been a huge financial operation and a huge money laundering transit. And it looks to me like you have many vested interests who, whether they're stuck in a debt position or they're stuck with money moving through the Ukraine, are, uh, they really cannot afford to let the U.S. do a deal with Russia. So you have Europe. I just talked to somebody in Germany, said they're talking about now doing a draft. But for some reason, the parties involved are not yet prepared to face the music. And I don't know, Mike, what it's going to take to face the music. I mean, the neocon strategy failed. We've lost. And the question is, where do we go from here? And for some reason, you have a lot of parties who aren't ready to move forward with a real deal. So I don't know what's going to happen. Trump just shut off all military aid to the Ukraine. So I don't know how much longer Europe can keep them going for. You tell me, if the UK is going to put in soldiers, where are they going to get them?
Oh, this is a very good question, and you mentioned Germany in the draft, and that's absolutely, that was a talking point in the UK a year ago under the Tory government. It was kind of let slide in the first few months of the Labour government, but that is back at front and centre of the talking points. Where are they going to get the men from to send? And it looks like conscription is absolutely on the cards. So we'll see with that one too. But look, let's move on, because you're talking about the financial side of things. Let's move on to that then. And one of the other things that Trump has done already is to stop further development of CBDC in the United States with his executive order to establish digital assets regulatory framework, as he calls it now. But this executive order is also establishing a working group comprised of the heads of several agencies, like the SEC and the CFTC, which is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, to be chaired by the president's special advisor for AI and crypto. And of course, they're doubling down on this whole Bitcoin and other crypto coin thing. And again, this question comes back to which is better, the privatized digital currency in the form of Bitcoin, or the public digital currency in the form of a CBDC, or should they all be dropped as quickly as we possibly can?
So what the control grid needs is an all digital monetary system. And you can do that private or you can do it public. In the United States, a private is much more dangerous. The central bank in the United States, very different than the ECB in Europe or the Bank of England, but the United States is still under the governance of the Constitution and Congress. And so the 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 Fed still has reporting and disclosure and other obligations to Congress. If you do a private one, especially if you take all the government data and give it to a private AI to do a private social credit system, then you're talking about something that is much, much more dangerous because you basically found a way to do the equivalent of a CBDC without disclosure requirements to Congress. So I think, in theory, the way we're headed is much worse. But remember, the danger is not a CBDC versus a private crypto; it's an all digital monetary system, and so let's go back. One of the things you need to do a digital control grid is you need the digital ID. Another thing you need is the fiscal policy reporting to the bankers. Another thing you need is an all digital monetary system. And the last thing you need is a social credit system. To do the all digital monetary and social credit system, you need mammoth database and data center structures in the United States. And of course, that's Stargate. So we saw the president on, the first week of his presidency announcing a $500 billion Stargate initiative for data centers all over the country and with mRNA vaccinations, which presumably is part of creating the Internet of Bodies. So you need all those pieces to snap in together, and together what they create is the digital concentration camp. So I would say the way that Trump is going about this is far more dangerous than the way the Fed was going about it.
Where does this leave the Fed, actually?
It's in complete control. So let me explain how the US government works. Every day, the federal government or every week borrows money. It operates on a deficit. So it's functioning, it's day to day functioning. It can't function tomorrow unless it gets money, unless it borrows money. Who runs that operation? It's the primary dealers and the New York Fed. They borrow the money and they put it in the bank account for the Treasury and the agencies in the New York Fed, and they transact their banking transactions. The day the New York Fed decides we're not borrowing money or we're not doing the banking transactions, the US government stops. So I would submit that the central bank is in complete control right now. And we saw at the beginning of the administration, there was a great moment. I don't know if you saw it, when a political reporter said to Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, if Trump asks you to resign, will you? And he says no. And he says, well, can the president make you? And he said no. We have a great new series by John Titus at Solari called War for Bankocracy, and that video is in the first episode. We're just going to publish the third episode tonight, but that video with the Politico reporter asking Jay Powell is in the first episode, and it's a hoot.
Yeah. Well, look, the reason I asked that question is because Bitcoin, for example, a digital currency based on uh, proof of work, and the work that they do to produce the currency is algorithmic, and so therefore related to AI. It's done in data centers with the same types of computer hardware that the AI models are run on, and so on. And so the question then is, if the aim here is to move towards a privatized digital currency, if that proof of work is being done at a state level, then effectively that's equivalent to just printing money, and that's sort of, but it's not Federal Reserve money, so that's why I was asking where that leaves the
So,
Fed.
so if you're going to do a global digital currency or a U.S. digital currency, I mean, right now our dollars are digital. Almost all of our transactions are digital in the dollar system as it is. But if you're going to use a crypto, you're not going to use Bitcoin. Bitcoin is relatively illiquid. The transaction fees are relatively high. Um, Bitcoin is perfect for a Ponzi scheme, for a pump and dump, but it's not perfect for a global crypto. And I suspect that's why when the president announced his intention to do a crypto reserve this last week, he mentioned XRP and two others and did not, he came back later and included Bitcoin. But, if there's going to be a social credit system teamed up with a crypto, it's going to be XRP or one of the ones that's truly designed to be a payment system. Bitcoin just can't work. I mean, if you look at the exponential increased numbers of times that Visa and Mastercard can do transactions Visa Bitcoin, Bitcoin just can't function, at that level.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Well, let's move on then to digital ID, because of course that's moving on apace here in the UK with the setup of the British government's Office for Digital Identities and Attributes. So, has there been equivalent progress on digital ID in the United States?
So since the Patriot Act, they've been trying to get something called the Real ID adopted, and their latest push is to do it through the states and insist that you need it to travel. And they're getting very bad uptake. So they keep warning people they can't travel after a certain point this year. I think it's May. And yet they're getting very poor uptake, but they're pushing hard. And of course, Trump is making all sorts of noises with election fraud and immigration on biometrics, and there's push for that. And I'm not current on the latest details on that. I've been trying to work with people at the state level to stop the Real ID. Um, I think, I'm hopeful that more and more people are beginning to understand the risk of this stuff. We've seen a real appreciation now for why it's so important to use cash and checks and to keep the financial system analog. And I don't know how you're doing on that in Britain, but people are starting to realize, oh, this technology is more to control. It's not really to help us.
How we're doing that on that in Britain. Well, every supermarket, for example, is doing its best to get rid of manned tills and to replace them with the automated tills. And but I am aware that, well, I do, but I'm aware that lots of other people as well simply refuse to use the automated tills. So there is still,
Yeah.
and in fact, the recent data is showing that there has been an uptick in the use of cash over the last couple of years, which I think is a positive development. But clearly, that is people standing their ground against corporations and the government. I mean, the government is working very hard to make sure that the only uh, connection between us as individuals and the government is a digital connection. They're talking about introducing the requirement to have digital ID in order to vote, and so on. So they're pushing very hard to this, but people aren't buying
Right.
it just yet. And hopefully that's something that we see in the United States and Europe as well.
So, one of the things that has really helped preserve cash is the disasters. And when you have disasters and electricity goes down, if people don't have cash, they're toast. And after North Carolina, we saw the Norwegian central bank. Norway has been very aggressive at pushing and extinguishing cash. And they announced we're down to 3% cash. And you know something? It's a mistake to go without cash because of what's happening with electricity and disasters. So we're going to roll it back. So the Norwegian central bank basically said, okay, we're going to embrace cash. And I thought that was an exceptionally positive development, but it only came after many different disasters made it clear to people. There was one great moment, Mike, when the governor of the New Zealand central bank, after remember the cyclones in New Zealand,
Yeah.
he came out and said, "Thank heavens we had cash." And I turned to John. We have a show with John Titus every week, and I turned to him and I said, "Apparently he didn't get the memo. He's not supposed to say that." But
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Uh, AI then, because you mentioned Stargate. So my question here is, do you think it's a coincidence that the British government, so Starmer, announces exactly the same policy as Trump's Stargate project just a week before Trump announced Stargate? Both of them established identical projects to build multiple data centers to host brand new AI systems, both under the cover of claims of personalized cures for cancer provided by mRNA jabs. It seems that's too much of a coincidence that we see that on both
it's
sides of
not
the
a quite.
Atlantic at exactly the same time.
They're both reporting to the same boss. In other words, Trump is no more in charge of the United States than Starmer is in charge of the UK, right?
Right.
So, the question is, who's, where's the operation? Who's really making these decisions? But this is a plan and it's being rolled out.
So who
So
is making the
it was,
decisions?
I know how it worked when I was in there, and there's always committees. They roll up and they have committees and they have long term plans and they implement them. And it comes down through the people who govern and run the financial system. So it comes down, in my experience, through the central bankers and the BIS. If you looked at the G20 meeting in September 2024, you had China, India, Russia, and the G20 all there, and the United States through India swearing allegiance to the BIS construct of digital IDs and CBDCs. So There is a planning process that is being run through the BIS and through the Financial Stability Board, um, with regular meetings and regular process to do the planning on all of this stuff. And it's been going on for years and years and years. The BIS has innovation centers around the world that are working on implementing all of these things. And there are the other international organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, all have task forces and groups that meet regularly on this stuff. So, I think it's coming down through the central banking and the G20 bureaucracy. That's what it
Yeah.
looks like to me.
Yes. If we're talking about personalized medicine, it seems to me that personalized medicine, it can't be anything to do with providing cures for anything, particularly when we're in an age of increasing recognition that the older generation is unaffordable. That's what we're told. Assisted dying is seen as a solution to that. And my question is, is personalized medicine actually about using AI to profile individuals with a view, I suppose, to assessing the likely cost of an individual to the system?
I
Yes.
think they can do all of that now, and they've been doing it for a long time. I used to call it the data beast when I worked in Washington. So I think they're doing a calculation on every person all the time. Are you worth more dead than alive? So I mean, don't laugh, Mike. When so I'm part of the Social Security system in the U.S. And I sat down and thought long and hard: should I take Social Security because then I'm worth more dead than alive?
Uh,
That will change my formula. So so I think they're doing all of that now. I think what the whole Stargate network will give them is the ability to apply a social credit system in terms of manipulating and managing people in a way where they can extract far more value. And two of the big questions I have, which are, we have a whole section that we do on unanswered questions. Two big questions I have is if you look at the all the information on what's called the Internet of Body, the mRNA technology, Moderna said they're loading an operating system in your body. And if you look at the nanoparticles that are in these injections and that are in the food and in the spray that are getting into people's bodies, it seems to be when you read their materials, they're talking about creating an internet of bodies. And two questions is, are they able to store data on human bodies and are they able to access energy from human bodies? And so to what extent is the data mining operation we're looking at going to include our bodies, literally? Think of your body as a server. And I don't know the answer. I've read a lot of materials and tried to make sense of it, but I just don't know. But it's clear that they want everything on the planet digitized. I was just looking at a website of somebody who's building the Internet of Forests, and they're digitizing using, nanoparticles. They're digitizing the trees and all the plants and all the animals. So they want to hook everybody and everything up and be able to track it 24/7 in real time.
and this brings us right back to Elon Musk. Now, I was interested in your comments in one of your recent talks where you described Elon Musk as being a defense contractor. And I just wanted to understand a little bit about why you said that.
His companies, according to one of the latest headlines, I think it was Washington Post, his companies have received $38 billion of contracts or grants from the U.S. government. Of course, the big one being SpaceX. SpaceX is a defense contractor, right? It's sending rockets up.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you're talking about. I mean, Elon Musk, in my view, is a defense contractor. He's a major defense contractor. So I
Why?
mean, it's just if he's gotten, if you look at Tesla, there are subsidies involved there, and he's the biggest recipient, apparently, Tesla, of Chinese government subsidies for electric cars.
Right.
So he's getting subsidies from both governments.
Why is it, do you think, that nobody sees the conflict of interest there?
Well, here's what's interesting. Let's look at the conflicts of interest. So, um, when I went into the administration, I had to pass a very rigorous ethics policy test. There's a White House ethics officer, and there's for any presidential employee, every presidential appointee has to go through extensive FBI background check and go through that conflicts. So one of the first things the Trump administration did was fire the ethics officer. Okay. Now, then on all the agencies, I think there were over 11 agencies where Musk's companies were under investigation. He had something like 20 plus investigations. I made a list at one point of them, but he had multiple investigations and regulatory actions. What they did is they went in and at most of these agencies, they fired the inspector general. And more often than not, that's the person who's doing the investigation, right? So one senator said it was the akin to, you know, firing all the sheriffs before the thieves come to town. So you fired and sort of delivered with the Doge layoff fears in all the agencies that are doing investigations. Then what we saw was now the FAA has let a big contract out to Starlink, which is part of SpaceX, the satellite surveillance network, and it truly looks like there was political influence there. But again, you can't prove now. If you're a government special employee, it is a crime for you to be involved in anything that impacts your personal profit. And whether it's the conflicts of interest or the cancellation of investigations or regulatory actions or the letting of new contracts, you're looking at potentially massive conflicts of interest and violations of conflict of interest law. The big one, however, Mike, is that Musk has three companies. One is X, one is XAI, and one is SpaceX. And according to published reports, Musk is out in the private markets raising capital for all three companies when, in fact, the transfer of data or the cancellation of these contracts or the new contracts dramatically impact the valuation of those companies, which is a massive conflict of interest. And it's not going to be a problem because the SEC, there was a special executive order as this was happening that sort of asserts more presidential control on the SEC. So they didn't fire the SEC inspector general, but if you look at what they've done, you know, Musk is, I mean, if to be out raising money for those companies. So, for example, I mentioned Neuralink is not one of the companies he's raising money for, but getting the people at the FDA who would oversee apparently the approval and oversight of Neuralink, you know, getting 20 of those people fired, big question marks there. So I've never, you know, to me, the big one is what does the transfer of data do to the valuation of his AI company? And it's interesting, his AI company, X has a deal with Visa, and his AI company has a deal with Palantir's AI company. When he did the deal with Palantir on January 27th for the Grok AI XAI to team up with the Palantir stock shot up like a rocket and Visa stock shot up like a rocket. So I'm assuming they were just assuming that Grok AI and the XAI and the and X were all going to be part of the new. Think of it as, you know, whether it's a combination of social credit or digital money. You're talking about putting in the new control grid and doing it privately through the Musk operations. You make no mistake about it. SpaceX is building one of the great surveillance networks of the world, right?
Right. So this is an interesting point because, you know, one of the reasons that Huawei was kicked off British telecoms networks, and I believe in the United States as well, was because of the perceived national security risk of having Chinese equipment on a network which is going to be dual use, so civilian plus military applications as well. And that in the UK's
Right.
case was the 5G network. Starlink is being sold to people as, you know, this great way for people in countryside areas to get access to the internet. But they're putting up these hundreds and hundreds of satellites. It's not just about internet access.
It's a global surveillance network. That's why some people call it Skynet, right?
The UK's equivalent. You know, the UK bought a satellite company called OneWeb a few years ago. It was out of business. Also putting up low Earth orbit satellites, just like SpaceX, and that system is the system that's being deployed is called Skynet. This is what they're you know, this is
It's
Internet
not
trolling,
so.
perhaps.
Ah,
Yeah.
it's all in the James Bond movies.
Exactly. Now, massive conflicts of interest, and apparently nobody really paying much attention to that. I mean, what is it going to take, and what do people need to do to raise the alarm bells on this?
My guess is what we're watching is the government simply being privatized. So you are watching the deep state strip out what they need and moving it private and building a control grid. And I think what you do depends on where you are, but the reality is, um, we can't look to the government to protect the basic bread and butter of day-to-day life and the civilian infrastructure. In other words, there's no longer anybody at home who's interested in maintaining a civilized infrastructure in our countries. And that means, we have to make other plans. So, this is why it's so important whether you're taking action in your home or you're taking action in your community in the United States, you should be working with the states. There are states where you can get a lot done at the state level, particularly because under our Constitution, the states are superior to the federal government in things not delegated to the federal government. And so there's a lot that can be done with the states. But you've got to focus on the bread and butter of daily life, which is food, water, shelter, energy. And you can't depend on government to provide those things or to make sure they're being done responsibly. So it's time to get very interested in what jurisdiction you're in and whether it's operating properly and what you can do to make sure it's operating properly and what you can make you can do to network. One of my favorite quotes, and you've heard me say this, Mike, is from the Swiss doctor who said, the currency of the future will be relationships of trust. And I think we need to come down to a very close, intimate level and look hard at who can we trust and who can we count on, including to provide the practical day-to-day things that we need in this world.
I think that's a really important message because we are constantly bombarded by people saying, "Well, what can we do?" And of course, what they're being demoralized by is they're seeing this massive juggernaut form, and they really don't have an answer to it. But actually, the answer is absolutely local because, as you say, we've got to be building our local communities. We've got to be sourcing our food and what we need on a local basis. This is something that people aren't doing in an active way at the moment. And of course, this control grid, which is being sold to us, is being sold to us in the form of entertainment, but it's also being sold to us in the form of convenience. It's convenient to
Right.
use a digital currency. It's convenient to have a digital e-visa scheme if you want to move to travel to another country. It's convenient to do all these things instead of sitting on the phone for 6 hours to HMRC or whoever it happens to be. It's convenient to phone your doctor or you take an online appointment rather than having to travel to the surgery. The first step, it seems to me, we've got to be willing to be inconvenienced and significantly inconvenienced and demand to be inconvenienced as a first step to dealing with this.
So it's funny because when I first realized this in 1998. I was sitting and I was writing a check on JP Morgan Chase private wealth account, and my hand froze and I said, "Why am I banking with the bank that's doing all the mortgage fraud? I need to come clean." So I dramatically, I tried to move everything out of global into local. I tried to move everything so that even my furniture was made by somebody I knew. I tried to make everything at an intimate level, and it took a couple of years to make the transition. We've got an article at Solari Report called "Coming Clean" that's about the process of going through it. And then one day I woke up and I realized my life is so much more pleasant because I don't have any bad dogs. The bad dogs are out of my pocketbook, they're out of my life, they're out of my health. They're out, I've just gotten rid of them all. And so I'm dealing with systems and people of integrity. And yes, it's much more low tech, but high tech isn't faster when you're constantly being defrauded by one player or another or lied to about health therapies or whatever. And so So what you want to do is you want to get into very, very high integrity, and that involves taking the time to do due diligence and to get to know people and build relationships and everything else. But it's a much, I mean, I got to tell you, I have a great life. And I have a great life because I'm associating with so many, my boss has thousands of subscribers all over the world who let me say whatever I want, even if they don't like the fact that I can be negative about Trump. So they get a little ornery about that sometimes, but when you move all the practical systems of your life to have as much integrity as possible, life gets much nicer because we are watching a civilization that's losing integrity as we speak. And if you think that disinformation is bad, wait till the AI reaches a level of an IQ of 6,000 and it's just spewing one disinformation after another. Seek integrity, don't worry about convenience.
Yeah, start with physical books, physical cash, physical everything, as far as I can see. Yeah. Um, okay. Well, look, that's roughly 45 minutes. So that's wonderful. I want to. I'd like to leave with one question. Speaking of central bankers, and that
Uh-huh.
is Mark Carney going to be the next Canadian Prime Minister?
God help us, probably. I just want to point out it's hilarious. We have two great documents. One is called, this is for the Americans, What the States Can Do. Although, if you're in any other country in the Western world, it will give you great ideas on what you can do in your country. But the other one is we have a big piece called Bitcoin Bailout. And if you want to understand why you don't want governments, I mean, if you're going to cut and fire all these people because you need to save money, the last thing you should be do is turning around and putting it in speculative assets. So get a copy of Bitcoin Bailout or What the States Can Do. It'll give you tons and tons of ideas on all the different things you can do. And if enough people start doing it, there is hope. There's a lot of hope.
Absolutely, and you said some nice things about the UK column at the beginning of this. Solari report is fantastic, and it's definitely worth the effort. So, if anybody isn't familiar with Solari, do go and have a look and grab a couple of the reports that Catherine's talking about. So, Catherine, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. That's been a really interesting conversation. I think we need to do much more on this in the future. And let's see how things develop, and let's see
Yeah,
how people
especially
react.
yeah, especially because if you look at the fact that the Stargate is being done at the same time in the same country, it's a plan, and we can see it when we integrate cross country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.